So good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. It is our honor to welcome actress Kate Winslet, of course, virtually, to this year's 56th Chicago International Film Festival. Thank you for
Hello.
being here. And also our honor to pay tribute to your illustrious, amazing career, and also tonight to celebrate your role in the upcoming Ammonite, which we are so excited to show to audiences here in Chicago at the drive-in. There is so much buzz and
Wow.
excitement around the film that, and so love that we're showing it in this like retro throwback way. So thank
Oh
you for
my God, that's brilliant. I love that you're doing that. God, I wish I could be there. How amazing. God, that's great.
Yeah, so I mean, of course, the drive-in has come about because of the past 7 months. We've all been living through this pandemic, which of course is an extraordinary time for us all, but we're finding like creative ways to bring great cinema and also have these great talks with actresses like you virtually. So I just wanted to check in and see how you're doing and what have you been up to?
Well, we're okay. We are okay, actually. Yeah. So I am currently in Philadelphia, where I've just gone back to work to finish shooting Mayor of Easttown, which is a 7-part series for HBO. Which I was 4 weeks away from finishing on when lockdown happened.
Oh gosh.
So I'm back here now finishing up. But I have been through for the whole of this 7 months back in the UK with my family. And we've all been doing okay, growing vegetables, got chickens, a lot of cooking, trying not to eat all of the cooking. Yeah, there was that really hilarious moment at the end of the summer where I went to put on a pair of jeans and I was like, no, maybe not, actually. maybe they just don't do up anymore. Oh well.
It's been good practice to get up and get dressed in regular clothes every day.
No, it's like a thing. It was like, oh, proper clothes. What are those? Such a shock. But yeah, so we've all been doing fine. Thank you.
Good. Glad to hear that. So just going back to 1994, that year, the Chicago International Film Festival presented Heavenly Creatures.
Heavenly Creatures, right, yeah.
By Peter Jackson, which of course featured you in your first leading role at the age of 17, I believe.
Yes.
I think I would love to hear you talk about your path into acting and how you landed this role.
Oh my goodness. How I landed the role in Heavenly Creatures? Okay. Yeah. So I always knew that I wanted to act, but I came from a place of real just passion for playing characters and being on stage, performing, creating voices, creating costumes, just the creation of it all. And I had grown up with a very healthy attitude towards acting and the pursuit of acting, because lots of my family did it, but no one made a living from it at all. So, my dad was a Christmas tree seller and a postman, and, he drove a delivery van, but he was also an actor. And so I always imagined that if I was lucky enough to get work, that I would still be doing all of these other things, waitressing, babysitting, I still imagined I'd be doing all of those things. And I never, ever imagined that I would be in films. Never, ever did I think. And so when an audition came up to try out for this part in a film being shot in New Zealand, I just had this really profound gut feeling that I had to get it. I just had to do it. But it wasn't like, oh, I'm going to get it. I'm going to do this. It wasn't like that. It was just this quiet, like a quiet voice saying, come on. Just got to go for this. Slow and steady wins the race. Just this quiet determination. And I just I just went for it. I believed that I was the right person for this part. So I sort of immersed myself in the world of it. I remember wandering around listening to Mario Lanza because that was what the girls listened to in Heavenly Creatures. And I'd never even heard of Mario Lanza, but it suddenly became a huge thing. And it seemed to me to be everywhere. I'd keep hearing it and I'd go, it's a sign, it's a sign. You know, that it was very strange.
Yeah.
And then I got the part, and
Yeah.
I that then became this sort of life of learning on the job, you know, because as an actor, that's really where you learn the most, is through the mistakes that you make and through keeping your eyes open and listening and watching other people. Especially film, you know, there's nothing that can really teach you what it's going to be like on day one on a film set. There's nothing, no school, no nothing can teach you that. And so I was just exposed to such riches really in that film, because there was Peter, there was Fran Walsh, his co-writer and partner, wonderful New Zealand actors. Sarah Pearce, who played the mother actually that we murdered, is still a very close friend of mine to this.
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
And this crew of very supportive, kind people. And so because that was the kind of introduction I had, I now feel such a sense of responsibility to young people and young actors to make sure that they too have a similar early experience that's healthy for them, that they can walk away feeling that they were themselves and they led with integrity and spoke their mind and felt free to make mistakes and learn from them. And so it's sort of an interesting time in my life right now, because I am working with a lot of young people and have the opportunity to pass along some of those things, which is really amazing, most extraordinary blessing. And when people people often say to me, you know, oh, it isn't all luck, you know, you had to work for it. And yeah, sure. But the fact that I was cast in that role, in that film, by that director at the age that I was, that's all luck. That is all luck. And I'm very, very grateful for that.
Right. And then you've shown, which, you know, I think, of course, was the launching pad or the springboard for so many other fantastic opportunities. Because it's also interesting to think the following year, I think that experience on the set must have prepared you well for being cast in Ang Lee's Sense and Sensibility, with, gosh, what an amazing ensemble of actors around you on that set.
Yeah, but I just kept thinking that I just kept thinking, you know, they've cast the wrong person, and they probably just didn't really have the heart to say, oh, sorry, you know, we read the wrong name off the list and we just phoned up the wrong girl. So I'm sort of here by accident. I mean, I really thought, and I totally thought I was going to get fired. I mean, I was terrified on Sense and Sensibility, and surrounded by those incredible actors who properly are trained and properly done, you know, many more films than me. And there I was. And again, like, how did all of that happen? You know, how come they didn't cast, you know, Uma Thurman or, you know, Winona Ryder? I mean, how did I end up, you know, I was still like Kate from Reading with the big feet. You know, I still am Kate from Reading with the big feet. But in those days, I definitely felt very out of place. But that experience of working on that film and alongside those people, that was a huge turning point for me, because it embedded some of the things that I had learned on Heavenly Creatures. And so I started to really feel, you know, that I had a little bit of knowledge, and I had, you know, I had much more confidence by the end of that film. Got to know myself a lot better, because obviously I was so young, you know, right. and young people can get so often caught up with thinking that they're supposed to know who they are. And right. I spent my 20s, you know, as well, talking about how, oh, I'm lucky, I'm strong, I am, and I know exactly what I want. What? I mean, I look back on it, I'm like, oh my God, I must have been so irritating to listen to. What was I talking about? So
I think we all go through that period in our 20s.
Yeah, definitely.
You know, and it's interesting to think about, I guess, developing those long-lasting relationships with some of those actors in Sense and Sensibility, like Emma Thompson, and also Alan Rickman, who I adore. is, and knowing that you
Oh.
played in Little Chaos, which she directed. Could you talk a bit about kind of those enduring relationships that you've developed from
When I
early on?
think back, when I think back to when I auditioned for Sense and Sensibility, so I had auditioned in Los Angeles, and I'd been there for, I think actually I was probably doing some press for Heavenly Creatures, and I had gotten an agent, an American agent, because of Heavenly Creatures, who I'm still with to this day. She's actually an Irish woman who lives in LA and has been there for 30 some years, and so I went for the audition, and I was very nervous, and I thought, well, and actually I didn't think it had gone terribly well, but then I was asked to go in and read with Emma Thompson on camera with Ang Lee. I mean, I completely was just shitting myself. I thought, oh my God, you know, what do I wear? What do I do? How do I? And I was quite thin in those days. And I remember thinking, oh God, I haven't even got I didn't have a proper warm coat. And I remembered that I had to get the train from where I lived in Reading outside of London into London, and then walk quite far from the subway station to where this old church was that we were doing this audition. And I remember thinking, oh, I'm going to be cold on the walk from the thing, and I didn't have quite enough money for the taxi fare, and I was still really like, I was just a young girl, like figuring it all out. And I'll never forget how kind Emma was. And she said, I walked in and she said, oh, good. I was worried that you were going to be than me, so that's good. And she said, oh, and our hair's quite similar colour. And she said, and I was wearing a blue top. I remember exactly what I wore. And I was wearing a blue top with long sleeves. And she said, I'll tell you what, when they put the cameras on, I've got underneath this chunky sweater I'm wearing a top that's quite similar colour to yours. So we'll both wear that and then we'll look quite similar. And I remember thinking, that's just really kind, you know. Yeah. And even the way she was, you know, it was quite clever on her part, because she knew I was going to be nervous. And so by sort of making this almost like girly connection with me, it really put me at my ease, especially given that Ang is a wonderful director, but he's very, very awkward, and very, you know, very entrenched in his own culture. And so actually his English wasn't very good, and it was quite hard to understand like his sensibility and what he was asking. And she was just wonderful at putting me at ease. And then I you know, how do I, and I'm like, you know, so many things have happened to me that to this day I'm like, wow, that happened. You know,
like you said, you know, Emma showed a generosity towards you that then you're paying forward now too to others, and kind of cycle can continue. And I'm sure many actors and actresses that, you know, are now acting with you will have those same stories to tell.
Oh, well, I hope so, because it's very important to me to do that. Yeah.
So of course, after that, you had an enormous success with Titanic the following year. And I can imagine that after Titanic, you had this amazing wealth of opportunities to pick the kinds of roles that you wanted to play and the directors that you wanted to work with. And I'm so intrigued, and I love the choices that you made, from Jane Campion's irreverent comedy, Holy Smoke, to the offbeat and endearing Hideous Kinky. Can you talk about kind of that moment and making those choices and choosing those roles?
Yeah, so, you know, it's really funny because people are actually asking me exactly this question quite a lot at the moment. I don't quite know why, but I finally feel like I'm actually able to answer it really fully and truthfully now. I don't know why. Maybe it's just this is such a reflective time for so many of us. But, you know, I was not ready to be famous. I was not. I was so young. I mean, and also, I know it sounds terrible, but I wasn't looking for fame. I mean, that wasn't a driving factor for me. You know, I just wanted to get jobs and be able to do this thing that I loved. I didn't think, right, you know, 5-year plan, this, get to this stage, you know, win an Oscar, you know, be famous, do this many films in blah, 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 make this much money. I never thought, not one single one of those things. I promise you, I really never did. And so when Titanic happened, you know, the reality is my life was thrown completely upside down. I was under enormous scrutiny from the British media in ways that were actually, I look back on it, quite cruel. And I felt utterly exposed, and my life changed. And I didn't want it to. I wasn't ready for my life to change. I wanted to hang on to myself. I had a lot to learn. I didn't really know how to fully, I didn't feel like I could even say, yeah, I'm an actress. I didn't feel like I'd really earned the stripes. I had to go and still earn more stripes and learn more craft and artistry and make mistakes more, you know, and not be in a high pressure situation where if I made one mistake, it
Yeah.
could put everything into the gutter. I didn't want that to happen. I somehow was very lucky that this survival instinct kicked in, and I thought, no, I can't play those parts. I don't know what, I'm not going to pretend I know just because someone's telling me I'm good. But that might not last, you know. Somehow I knew that I still had to. And by doing films like Hideous Kinky and Holy Smoke, I was able to hide a little bit and work on exactly those things that I've just mentioned, and also just get to know myself. You know, I didn't know my true self at all, and I needed to have that time and, you know, be a young woman, which I think is hard these days, in particular for young actors. It's very, very hard for them to just be young people because they're so observed and scrutinized, and social media is right there, and you know, there's this compulsive need to share everything and show the world what you're doing, and lo and behold, before you know it, you'll make a mistake or you'll do something even vaguely foolish and a bit sort of like, you know, teenagery or, you know, early 20s behavior pattern, and it's bad or wrong when you should, you know, apologize for it or for what you did, or, you know, in ways that can be a little off balance with just a natural progression of evolvement of age and self-esteem and all of those things.
There isn't a lot of room to make any mistakes.
Exactly. And so I knew that I needed to give myself the space to make mistakes. And I'm just very fortunate that I was able to do that and keep working and do interesting things with very interesting people. And then a real turning point, I think, was probably Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, because by that point I was because by that point I was 20. God, how old was I? I had Mia when I was 25, so I was 27 when I did Eternal Sunshine. And at that point I did feel, you know, I definitely felt, you know, I was earning the place, you know, knew what to do in order to stay there, you know, and that part, you know, playing Clementine Krasinski, you know, it's like, and now of course a whole other generation of people love that movie, and I'm like, yeah, I was Clementine. You know, I have this feeling.
You know, I think, yeah, it's, I mean, I think for our generation, it's a cultural touchstone, you know, that film is, but you're right, it's kind of has remained that way. And I think I think really resonates with the moment that we're in right now as well, in terms of relationships and this idea of like connecting or forgetting. So, you know, and I think it is such a unique film. And of course, Clementine on the surface is also quite a unique and different character, and quite different from a lot of the characters you've played. Was she as refreshing for you as she was for the rest of us?
Yes, she was just so much fun. You know, often Leo and I would conversations when we were doing Revolutionary Road, you know, what was our most rewarding part, and I would always say Clementine, and he would always talk about the role that he played in Gilbert Grape, because he just could be inventive every day, and he was like literally I could do whatever the hell I wanted within the shape of the character, and almost everything would stick in some way. And it was the same with Clementine. I mean, I just, you know, it kind of released something in me, a sort of a freedom of spirit. I've always been fairly free spirited, but being able to do that on camera was just, oh my God, it was just such a luxury, and it was so much fun, and the costumes and the hair, and you know, it was a really, really rewarding experience. And I loved working with Michel Gondry. God, you know, inventive, insane, wonderful, visionary director. And often he would do things with the camera, and he would design They're thinking, oh my God, this is never going to work. How
Yeah.
is this going to work? You know, what do you mean I'm going to walk in the room this way and then I'm going to run around the back of the camera and disappear out the door and then come back? It's never going to work. And every time it would blow people's minds. We'd all run to the monitor after every take to watch it all back. And it'd be like, you know, our own like private viewing of the things that we just shot. And we just couldn't believe it.
There's something so special about that too, because I do think it's also one of Jim Carrey's best roles, and something that's kind of brought out in each of the actors by that film that I think
exactly. I agree. Yeah, I really agree.
So of course, after this, you played two very memorable roles in Little Children and Revolutionary Road. And for me, I think thinking back on them, there's a sense that these types of films that are sophisticated and astute and very thoughtful dramas, they're not being made quite as much anymore. But I also think that Ammonite harkens back to them. And it's a good kind of example of this intimate type of cinema. And I guess one question is, do you see that yourself kind of in Ammonite and the way that it might relate to those two films? And what are the elements of those types of scripts that draw you in?
Well, I think with Little Children and Revolutionary Road, you know, I think the thing that attracted me most to those stories was the writing. I mean, the writing of both those scripts was just, I mean, absolutely next level. But also, you know, I think as women, when you're a mother and a wife, you know, it's very easy to sort of forget your own personal interior world. You know, it's very easy to lose touch with your true self, because of course we get so used to putting our true selves to one side because everything is about the children and the family unit. And I mean, it certainly is for me. And I definitely I mean, to this day, I put myself last. I mean, whatever. But I think because those films, and in particular Revolutionary Road being set in the 50s in the way that it was, you know, the way women lived their lives then was not just different to how we live our lives today, but it was a very sort of formulaic existence. And I've been a woman who has wanted to change her circumstances in order to find something different, without necessarily knowing what it was that I may have wanted to try and find. You know, I think we all possess that desire for adventure and, you know, just experience, you know, even if you're in the happiest of relationships, you know, sometimes there's a part of you that forgets how to stay connected to yourself. And so I think with Little Children and Revolutionary Road, those stories struck chords with me for those reasons. I think you're right that, you know, the film world has changed so much because of course the power of television has kicked in, and, you know, also going to the movies is a very expensive date now.
I also think kind of there's the rise of the superhero films too, which has kind of left a void kind of in the middle between the super low budget and then the high budget as well. And, you know, when you see a film like Ammonite, you're like, oh, there's this room for this type of cinema again. And, you know, it also makes you hopeful for that.
Yeah, well, I think that's true. And it made me feel hopeful for that. And I love that you can identify with that and point it out, because I felt that when I read the script. And, you know, sometimes there is this sense, you know, when I'll read a script, I'll think, oh, you know, there's not going to be many of these around for much longer. And it's like, oh, what's happening? It's almost like, you know, small, independent, quiet films are becoming a sort of like a dying species or something, you know. And so being able to honor that medium and participate and contribute to those conversations and those stories and that artistry is very, very important to me. And to be cast, I think, in Ammonite as a middle-aged woman, which I am now. I'm turning 45 on Monday. Thank you. But to be a middle-aged woman cast in a role like that one, where I'm part of a very delicate love story with a younger woman who is almost half my age, there was something very empowering about that for me. and I felt proud. You know, this isn't the same face that it was, you know, however many years ago. I don't have the same body I had when I was 25. You know, it's all different now. And to be in a position where I can utilize my true physical self to play this part and not hide any of it. It's been the single most empowering experience of my whole entire life. It really, really has. And I feel really good about that. You know, I feel great about that message, and playing a part in saying something with integrity and showing it. I just, you know, I want to make other women believe in themselves. You know, it's a hard world. It's hard to do that. And, you know, I don't have any magic secret. I just I've been able to make the most of an opportunity that came my way, and playing this part, playing Mary Anning, this quiet, still, you know, impoverished, brilliant, extraordinary scientist, you know, whose life's work was basically stolen from her, from rich, powerful men who weren't as clever. Telling her story as well in this non-autobiographical way has just been enormously rewarding, because people will know more about her. They will know more about who she was, what she did, the significance, the historical scientific significance of what she did. You know, she found the first ever ichthyosaur when she was 11 years old, and it took her a year to dig it out, and she and her brother did it together. You know, she discovered fossilized feces, the coprolite, and if it wasn't for her those findings, we wouldn't know what dinosaurs ate. And to learn all that, I had to learn all of that. I had to learn how to fossil hunt. I know how to identify those things, how to find them, where to look. You know, Ammonites sometimes hide in these stones that look like a stone, but actually it's called a nodule. And to identify what those nodules are and how to crack them open with these very special tools and find ammonites inside of them. I mean, I trained things, and I walked on the beaches, literally in her footsteps, the very beaches that she trawled every single day with her freezing cold hands and her strange basket. And she had a dog, she had a pet dog called Trey, who very sadly died before her very eyes in a landslide. And she was her own woman. She was a pure integrity and strength of character. And I admired that. It's hard to be those things.
I mean, my question
especially then.
I was going to ask you about kind of how, but both joyful and empowering it must be to bring a story like this and Mary Anning's story to light. And I love hearing you talk about it in that way. One of the other things that I think is so interesting, or that I think where one of your true talents lies, is oftentimes you've played, we call them maybe exacting women who are very strong. And whether it's Hannah Schmitz in The Reader, or Mildred Pierce, or Joanna Hoffman and Steve Jobs. And I think Mary Anning is kind of part of this lineage, but what I think you managed to do so well, and must be a challenge, is you have make these very steely women very likable and sympathetic. And so I just wanted to hear you talk about kind of the challenges of that, kind of showing both kind of that harder or quieter or more contemplative, or, you know, somebody that's holding so much within but has this rich inner life that we're able to see through your representation.
Yeah, so, well, I do quite a lot of homework, and, you know, the homework isn't sitting down and studying books necessarily all the time. I mean, God, that can be so damn boring, you know, but sort of building that person, and that can be anything from an invented backstory to a real one that I can actually find in the history books. But framework, you know, creating that person's day-to-day life, you know, and not just likes and dislikes, but, you know, the rhythm of their day, you know, how did they live? And actually with both Hannah Schmitz and Mary, I sort of, you know, there's this thing I sometimes say as an actor, like, what can you get for free? Like, sometimes what can you get for free? And that doesn't mean being method, but it just means making what is around you sometimes work for the role. So for the reader, we were filming on the German-Polish border, quite bleak. I was by myself. I didn't have my family with me for 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. And that was very hard, but I was able to at least completely immerse myself in that role. So I lived quite silently. You know, I didn't have, there was a television, never switched it on. You know, there was a radio, never switched it on. You know, trying to live within the rhythm, the daily rhythm of the character, you know, eating things that I could imagine they may have been able to eat. I know that sounds really foolish, but, you know, just even the way, like sitting, like Hannah would have sat herself down and she would have prepared her breakfast and she would have eaten her breakfast, and it probably would have been at the same time each day. And then she would have gone about her work and continued on with her daily routine. And so building in things like that, it just set me up, you know, set me up each day. And when it came to Ammonite, I did the same thing. So, you know, lots of people were staying in little hotels around Lyme Regis, the cast and the crew together. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to be separate because I knew I had to try and find some of the Mary rhythm and also some of the fear that she may well have felt falling asleep at night with the blustery wind and the rain hitting the house outside. You know, she lived twice right down on the waterfront in Lyme Regis. I was able to find a house almost on the waterfront. And 3 sides of the property were exposed to the elements, and a very shingly beach with huge cliffs to the left. And I was alone. And I also slightly had, you know, I had the slight awareness that, you know, people locally knew somewhere in, Kate Winslet was living somewhere in this town, because I'd go to the little bakery or I'd go to the little cafe and I'd sort of sneak in and run out again, but I'd sort of be spotted. So I felt like I was kind of hiding a bit in this house, but that was how Mary lived. Mary was constantly hiding from people because she was quite introverted and she just wanted to do her work and she just had to cope and survive and get by. So as much as I could do to sort of emulate her existence. So I would go to work, I'd come back, I'd make this very boring basic soup every evening. No television, no radio. I would write and I would draw prepared for the next day and do these things that were part of her life. And through doing that, it anchored me in a place that made the character come from somewhere sort of integral and honest. And somehow then through that, I feel I'm able to ask the audience to empathize. They don't have to sympathize. They don't even have to like the character, but to find some degree of empathy. That for me is an important thing, because we all have the capacity to empathize. It's about tapping into that, you know, and also not manipulating, you know, trying not to manipulate an audience as well, because that can also be quite an easy one to do, believe it or not, and trying not to trick the audience. You know, this is the person I'm playing, and honoring that character with sincerity and honesty, you know. And it's hard. It's hard, you know, and it's a joyful, wonderful job, and I love it so much. But it's hard. I mean, there are days, like I think about Mildred Pierce. I remember there were times, because the workload was so enormous on that show, and driving to work in the morning through New York streets to the studios in Brooklyn where we were filming our interior stuff. And I remember I would sit there with my script on my lap and tears rolling down my face, and I would just go say, I can't. And then I take a deep breath, wipe the tears away, and I go, no, come on, you can. Just make myself go. And I was having a very difficult time personally when I was shooting Mildred, and I had my 2 small children, and it was just so hard getting through that whole thing. It was an 18-week shoot. I was in every scene, and it was exhausting beyond belief. But again, somehow I was able to use what I was personally dealing with, and just throw the whole lot into the character, you know. And I don't always like to really wholeheartedly do that, because I'm not sure it's entirely healthy, but sometimes you just don't have a choice, you know. You've got to stick it somewhere, so why not just stick it to the character? And I do remember really doing that with Mildred.
And it comes through in kind of the layers, and you understand the anguish and kind of what's happening beneath the surface with those characters. So I think because you're able to empathize with them, that the audience also kind of feels that. So I'm gonna go back a little bit to Heavenly Creatures again, just because, and it occurred to me when I first saw Ammonite that the relationship between Marilyn and Charlotte, and essentially this close bond that the two women develop that sustains them in an environment that's unfriendly to them. It echoes that connection between Juliet and Pauline and Heavenly Creatures. Not necessarily in the nature of the characters, because of course Juliet and Pauline are very tempestuous, but in the ways that they find, whether it's solace or joy or acceptance in one another. I then read an article or an interview with you where you talk about this in Vanity Fair, but I was wondering if you could talk about thinking about kind of almost coming full circle in some way with that very intimate female relationship.
It's so funny because, you know, there's a part of me that, you know, I just feel so proud to have been part of creating that relationship, and I'm trying to find the right things to say. You know, it's true what I said actually in that Vanity Fair piece. I didn't read it, but I'm trying to remember some of the things I was talking about and how interesting it is and how interested I was to discover. And this was a proper discovery that I made. I mean, look, you know, none of this stuff is rocket science, but I'm just sharing what I learned. When you remove these sort of romantic heterosexual stereotypes, my God, I mean, I felt like mad at myself when I did Ammonite. I felt like, what have I been doing? Have I just been, let me check myself here. Like, how have I handled myself in on-screen heterosexual relationships before? Have I just been the willing little woman who has been led by the man, taken by the man, wooed by the man? Have I allowed the demographic of being the flirtatious, beautiful one? I've enabled these concepts and these stereotypes. I've actively participated in some of that when I maybe could have had, you know, just a bit more of a voice, you know. Not to say that I have ever felt undermined or pressured, or because I don't think, maybe a few times, a little bit, but it just made me question how I'm going to proceed, you know, because the conversation is totally different when it's two people of the same sex. And it was just incredibly equal, you know, and very communicative. And also, you know, we know what we want. Women know what we want. Right. And so to have that shorthand, to have that unspoken dialogue in putting together these intimate scenes with Saoirse, it was really just new and different and very joyful, very powerful. And when I think back to Heavenly Creatures, you know, when you're a young woman, I mean, I'll say it, like, you know, I kissed girls when I was younger. I don't think I've ever said that out loud before. My publicist is probably going to do backflips, but, you know, like, I don't really know anyone who hasn't. Like, I've got, you know, like, friends, I know friends of mine, we talk about this kind of thing a lot. And so for me, actually doing Heavenly Creatures, it just felt like part of the energy of what I was kind of living in a funny way in that particular chapter of my life. And I understood the imaginative, fantastical nature of the relationship between Pauline and Juliet, because when you are a teenager, my God, you can imagine things that are real. They're things, they are feelings, and they might not be real feelings, and they might be bigger than you, but moment that you're feeling them, they are absolutely real. And I was that person. I was in that time in my life. And so again, it was like, I kind of got that for free because that was how I was, you know, that was how I was. And so, yeah, it's, but as I say, to create the relationship with Saoirse, I think particularly being 20 years older than her, I don't know, I just felt very, very, I just felt proud of myself in a way for, you know, allowing, just going, I think, going the distance in terms of no vanity, not trying to hide behind anything, you know, no soft focus and flattering lighting, you know, just completely being my raw self, and also noticing things about my my face, my neck, you know, things that are changing. And even when I watch the film, I'm like, oh wow, look at my neck doing that new crunkly thing. Well, okay, I guess that's what's happening right now, you know. So yeah, it's, you know, it's such a, you know, such a poignant time for a story like Ammonite, which is very much about the power of sparse touch, because touch is so sparse at the moment, and the need for connection and intimacy and warmth. And playing a character as still as Mary Anning, you know, Frances had to work with me, so, because, you know, I mean, even in this interview, you know, I'm talking to you and I'm doing this with my hands, and I'm busy with my hands all the time, you know, and I, you know, you put my hands on my face a lot, and Frances would say, Winslet, stop moving your hands. No, keep them like paring it back all the time, like literally stripping movement out of my body. And that was really hard for me, I've got to say.
Yeah, I do think that's, for me, one of the notable things is that there's these really impactful yet super quiet scenes where so much is conveyed in just a glance or a very small gesture, and yet it just has this wealth of emotional connection, and, you know, there's this great chemistry that's established even in kind of this, like you said, very pared down kind of, whether it's a movement or speech. And there's an incredible dynamism that comes out of this simplicity. So, I mean,
that's Francis. I mean, that's Francis Lee. You know, he's just, everything had to be earned. Every gesture had to be earned. Every flick of the eyes had to be earned. You know, every sort of quivering finger, you know, I had to earn all of it. And the only way that we could do that was to find this real stillness and a quiet in Mary. Because in many ways she was remarkable and brave, but quite fearful, I think, of people in the world. You know, she was happier on the beaches with the fossils, and you know, not necessarily comfortable socially, much admired and revered. You know, and James McArdle, who plays Roderick Murchison, Charlotte's husband, you know, he comes to Lyme Regis in search of Mary Anning. That's real. I mean, people really did do that. And I read many letters and diaries by brilliant scientists, William Buckland, Thomas Della Beach, people who worked with her a lot, but specifically went to Dorset in order to do that. And then bought her findings and put their names on them.
Had you grown up going to the British Museum to see some of the fossils?
I've been to the British Museum twice in my life. And I think I probably had seen Mary's relic, but without really knowing what I was looking at. And actually, even its position in the museum to this day is quite weird. Like, it's almost in like it's almost like in a corridor that you sort of walk. I hope they move it, because it's like, it's not, you know, the way it's really presented in the film, it's kind of not quite like that. So I'm hoping that they move it and make a little bit more of it now.
Great. Well, I wanted to congratulate you on this amazing role in Ammonite. And just, like I said, we're so excited for our audience just to see it. But we're also here to give you a Career Achievement Award from the Chicago International Film Festival.
Oh my
So
goodness.
here it is. For
Oh,
your
wow.
Okay.
Let me reach. Let me reach. Let me reach. Let me reach. Let me reach.
Got
Thank
it?
you so much.
So it's for your riveting and layered performances, for creating characters with an astonishing mix of strength, passion, and complexity across diverse time periods and places. The 56th Chicago International Film Festival is proud to present you with the Career Achievement Award.
With a fan, because you're fans.
We're fans.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Can't believe
you.
I'm holding up my handheld fan. What does that tell you about how sweaty I get at night? Thank you so much. Thank you. What a privilege and an honor, and how lovely to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you.